Hello science people, Amy here, bringing you an experiment from what I'm in the process of making my study, and we're going to be doing an experiment on pulleys today. So for that you're going to need a object with a horizontal bar. I'm using my clothes rack. It is super helpful for our purposes if this bar is circular. So it's round, so there's no corners. You're also going to need a little container. I'm using a cardboard box from my coffee pods. You can also use the bottom half of a soft drink bottle, cut it in half. And you need some weights. So what I'm using as weights are the small cans of tuna that you can get for single serves. You can also use regular size cans, but I picked the small cans because that's what's going to fit in my box. So let me pause while I get some other materials so I can run through them as well. So the other things I've got are some string. So this is just cotton twine that I think I found in the bottom of one of my boxes when I moved in. I can't remember where I got it from. But any sort of wool or twine or fishing line or the plastic raffia stuff that you can use, you need it to be reasonably strong, but it doesn't have to be like super heavy duty. A pair of scissors. And I've got a tape measure because I can't find a ruler as I've moved stuff around in here. I can't find a ruler, but I can find a tape measure. But just, yeah, something to do some measuring with. So let's start setting up our pulleys. Sorry, one other thing that I've just remembered we need. So this is a chopstick that came from a takeaway food delivery that I got. You could also use like an actual chopstick, or you can use one of the like kebab skewers. The thing with the kebab skewers though, you're going to have to be careful about how much weight you put in your box because you don't want to snap the skewer. Okay. Let's get started. So we're going to start with the load. So what we're actually going to be lifting up using our pulley. So for that, you start with your box or your half a drink bottle or whatever. And we need to punch some holes in the top of this. So I'm just going to use the end of my scissors. If you're using a skewer, it might be pointy enough to go through. So I'm just that and that. And then your skewer or your chopstick goes through. So this is like a little hanging basket. Then what you need to do, you need to take the end of your string and tie a loop around here. So we start with our string, and yes, you can see what I'm doing. I'm just going to tie a double knot in that string, making sure that even though I've tied a knot, I can still move my string. So I want to start about 1/3 of the way along my horizontal bar. So let me see if I can work out how I'm going to angle this. Okay, this is going to be a bit tricky. Let me pause and see if I can find the right camera angle. Okay, that's a bit better, even though I now have to make sure I'm stretching. So down the bottom here, I've got my box with my skewer, and up the top here, I have my string secured to my bar. Now, what I'm going to be doing every time I do this experiment, I am going to be lifting my load to this bottom bar. If you've got a setup where you've only got the one bar, what I'd suggest is if you're against a wall, get a little bit of masking tape and mask off a level that you're going to raise it to about halfway up where you're going. So halfway up to this fixed point is where you want to be lifting each time. So what I'm going to do now, and this is spelled out in the document, I am going to measure how high I am lifting up my load each time. So record that into your spreadsheet. Let me pause while I show you how I've set up my spreadsheet. Okay, so let me just share my screen over to here. So this number of loops I will describe as we start doing the experiment. This distance travelled is this height here that I am going to lift my object every time. So on my rack here, it is 60 centimetres. So my object is going to be travelling 60 centimetres. The distance of rope used. So for this first one, we are not going to use pulleys at all. We are just going to lift up our object. So if I was just like pulling this up like this, I start with my hand up against where I'm going to, and then I measure the distance of rope that I use to lift it. So I'm just measuring this distance of rope that I use to lift up my box. So this is where having a second pair of hands might be super helpful, but you can also, if you don't have a second pair of hands to help you, you could use a texter and mark your rope. So we are going to measure this distance of rope here, which, let me pause and get a pen and do this properly. Okay, so I am starting with my rope here. And I know you can't see that from where you are, but I've made a purple mark on there. I measure this distance. Now this is 60 centimetres. So when there are no loops, when I'm not using a pulley at all, that distance is 60 centimetres. So let me put that in my spreadsheet. So I'm using 60 centimetres. Now this description, so I'm using no loops. The distance my object moved was 60. The distance of rope that I used was 60. Now this description is where these weights start to come in handy. So the first time you do this, I would suggest just using an empty container and just focusing on the distance that my object moves versus the distance of rope that you use. This description, we're going to talk about how hard it is to pull on the rope to lift the object as we change the number of loops. So we've worked it out with no loops, so just lifting up the object directly. What we're now going to do is, using the skewer, we are going to loop our string around our skewer. So that our skewer or our chopstick. Now, that object goes on the ground, and where that skewer sits where that rope sits against the skewer, I want you to make your mark so you can measure. So we are going to lift our object up. So it's on, it reaches that 60 centimetre mark that we want our object to travel. Then the distance that our distance of rope that we used is this distance here. And again, you measure that and record it into that spreadsheet. So that's 1 loop. For 2 loops, so your first loop goes down the bottom, your second loop gets attached back up at the top. So my rope is tied off here, loop 1 is down the bottom, loop 2 is back up here. So I make a mark up here to see how long I'm measuring, and I lift up my object so it's at the level I want it to, and then I measure this distance, the distance from where I started pulling to measure the length of rope that I used. So this is 2 loops. I've got 1 loop in my box and my second loop up the top. Next, so to make 3 loops, what I do, I have loop 1 in the box, loop 2 up the top, loop 3 goes back into the box. Excuse me while I fiddle a bit. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, 3 loops, and again, I am lifting my object. Whoop. I am lifting my object so it goes up to that 60 centimetres where the height of my measurement was, and then I measure the length of the rope that I used. You might be able to tell even from this video that something is changing about the length of the rope I'm using, even though the length that my object is travelling is different, is the same every time. So, depending on how you're set up, this is 1, 2, 3 loops. You might be able to go 4 loops. So, I've got loop 1 in the box, loop 2 up top, loop 3 in the box, loop 4 up top. So the reason I'm shuffling this a bit, because there's a little bit of friction on that chopstick, the rope isn't quite moving smoothly. So I just need to sort of wiggle it a bit to make sure that those ropes are moving. So this distance, and this is where you might really need a hand, this distance is from where I initially picked up my rope to where I initially picked up my rope over here. Okay, so that's for our numbers. Now, for our descriptions, what we need to do is actually reset, or at least the way I've got mine set up, I need to reset just back to having my string and my box with no loops. Okay, I'm going to edit this bit out because I look a little bit strange at the moment. So for this second bit, we're going to fill out the description column that was in that spreadsheet. Now, to do a description, it really helps if you're not just carrying an empty box up. It's easier if that box is a little bit heavier. So all I'm going to do is pop my skewer out, put in my cans of tuna, and reinsert that just to make my box heavier. Now you can use, as I said, you could use cans. Be careful if you go super heavy with this though, because your string might not take it. And also when you're lifting it, you might not be able to see, but I'm sitting cross-legged on the floor. And if your string breaks, I don't want you to hurt your toe with something heavy falling on it. So I've just put some weight in here just so I can feel what happens when I increase my number of loops. So just lifting versus what happens when I start introducing those loops. And I'm using the same string. You don't have to use the same string again, but I am using the same string. So how difficult does that feel as we're using descriptions here? So how difficult does that feel compared to this? How difficult did that feel? How heavy did that feel when I've got 2 loops versus when I've got 3 loops? Okay, sorry, let me just loop. Come on, loop. Now, the reason I don't suggest doing the measuring with the heavy container is that it can be difficult to hold a heavier box in place while you're doing that measurement of the length of the string that you're using. So that's why I'm suggesting doing this experiment in 2 parts. Even though all of your data is going to go into the same spreadsheet I showed you earlier, I would suggest separating them into 2 halves of the experiment. Okay, sorry, one thing I will say, if you don't have something with a round bar, if you've got like a towel rack that's got like corners on it or something, you can use that. But what you need to do is get a toilet roll, cut it down the centre, then put it over the bar that you're going to use, and then sticky tape it. So get a little bit of sticky tape. Sticky tape that. And then when you're doing your loops around your bar, put them on that round roll. Remember, we talked about how wheels are useful in terms of friction and in terms of helping things move. That's absolutely why you need either a round bar, or you need to turn a square bar into a round bar by using an empty toilet roll holder, or like the inside of a the inside of like kitchen paper towel, or worst case scenario, you get a piece of cardboard and you just sticky tape it into a circle around your bar. Okay, thank you so much. Hope you have fun with this. Have a fantastic rest of your day, and I shall see you next time. Bye.